Here we go. Welcome to another episode of the Practical SQL Server HA show. My name is Edwin Sarmiento, and welcome to this show. I want to start calling it show, however you want to call it. The purpose of all of these videos is twofold. One, if you're a tech professional, whether you're a database administrator, a systems administrator, or even if you're a developer who just happens to be sitting beside the server, and then you have been voluntold to now take care of your high availability solutions running on SQL Server, this is for you. It's to give you insights, lessons, mistakes, in my case, a lot of mistakes that I've done in the past, blunders, and some of, I don't want to say general best practices, because best practices are environment specific, whether whether it's coming from a vendor or it's coming from somebody else. It only applies in their environment. General best practices, sure, but you still have to test them within your environment. So again, if you're a tech professional who's taking care of SQL Server high availability solutions, or you are being told that you're now responsible for designing a high availability solution for your SQL Server databases or any Microsoft Data Platform solutions, this is for you. On the flip side, of course, I also get messages, connection requests on LinkedIn, sometimes emails from decision makers. These are people who are in charge of teams: VP of IT, director of IT, CTO, CIO, database manager, and you are taking care of your team. I also provide insights, lessons, mistakes as well on how to properly look at it from a higher point of view, or a much higher perspective in managing not just the database environment, but also your team. Because at the end of the day, as a decision maker, your goal and your job is to make decisions. I wanted to let me see, because I'm also testing some of my setup here. I wanted to continue. I don't want to say continue, but there we go. I'm testing my setup still. I wanted to continue. I don't want to say continue, but I've started doing these live streams and videos again earlier this year. And as a data professional, I look at statistics and data. Of course, you're a data professional, right? And you start analyzing. And a couple of weeks ago, I did a video series called Beyond the DBA World, where I talked about the different components outside of SQL Server that SQL Server depend on when it comes to high availability. Stuff like Active Directory, DNS, networking, storage, anything else, specifically, of course, Windows Server failover cluster, that affects high availability or dictates high availability when it comes to putting your databases in something like a failover clustered instance or an availability group. And I did not expect that to get a ton of views. I did not expect that to be like in demand. Maybe it resonated with so many people, and so I decided, hey, why don't I come up with something that is related to that? So I decided to come up with something called Beyond the DBA series. What you need, and this particular topic is all about what you need to become a high availability and disaster recovery expert. Okay. Couple of things though. Maybe, and I'm making assumptions here, maybe people who watched the video resonated with them, and they were thinking, wait, I'm at that stage in my career where I now have to learn this. I've gotten emails from people who have signed up for my training classes, for my online courses. In fact, I met people recently. I was at Bits, and I met people who said this entire program literally changed my life, because it's more than just a technology skills development, right? And the way they explained it is that it forces you, when you're working with high availability and disaster recovery solutions, it forces you to step outside of what you normally work on. Again, a quick reference to that video that I did a couple of weeks ago, Beyond the DBA World, where you literally have to go outside of SQL Server to learn about the things that affect SQL Server. It's just like saying your job now is dependent on the things that you're not even aware are dependent on. So you really have to be conscious, and you have to put effort into making sure that you understand all of these things to properly support a high availability solution. But not only that, maybe you're at that point in your career where you're thinking, I want to upgrade my skills. Maybe I want to get promoted. But what's the next step? Sure, you're probably an operator. And I've heard this when I was working at a managed services provider. You're an operator. You're doing the day-to-day. You are taking care of the databases, the monitoring, ticket resolution, issue escalation, stuff like that. But then I wanted to move up. But what's the next step? Okay, there are different roles available, but I wanted to focus more on the architecture side, because architecture, when you think about it, uh, requires a different way of thinking. Okay, why don't I put the banner there? Beyond the DBA series, what you need to become an HADR solutions architect, it requires a totally different way of thinking. But before I dive into that, I want to set the stage first. Most people, no, most operators, okay, and I've heard this first from one of my friends before. He was a hardcore Oracle DBA, and he wanted to stay as a DBA because that's where the action is. He wants to keep his technical skills. He wants to make sure that he is sharp as far as technical skills are concerned. Meaning, if he sees an issue, he knows how to deal with it, and then he goes deeper into mastery on different areas of the database engine. Again, from his perspective, Oracle. And his mindset was, wait, if I move above this, the perception was I will be detached from the technical aspects of the implementation. Okay, meaning you are slowly moving away from the technical field. It's also one of the reasons why he said, I don't want to be a manager, because managers don't get to do the hard work, and that's fine. That is fine if the goal is for you to be technically savvy and for you to be a subject matter expert on that particular field. However, this is a role, and I don't want to say it's simply a role, but this is a responsibility. Being a solutions architect is a responsibility where you're actually highly technical, while at the same time requires an additional set of responsibilities that would literally force you outside of your comfort zone. And I say that because this is a common theme that I hear from, again, operators, database administrators, systems engineers, where they have their pulse on just about anything, meaning they do the day-to-day. They want to stay in the technical realm of technical expertise that they are in. And the idea is, hey, if I move up, if I get promoted, I'm slowly moving away from the real action. This is to say, it is, as a solutions architect, you would require both, meaning you have to be highly technical. That's a given. Okay, you don't leave that behind, while at the same time you have to also learn a totally different set of skills and have a totally different set of a totally different way of thinking. Okay, and that's why I wanted to set that aside and clear that aside, because it's also one of the reasons why solutions architects are paid more, because they have, beyond just the technical abilities, they have non-technical abilities that are required in order to solve a problem or to come up with a solution that meets the business needs. Okay, so let me jump back into this. What you need to become, or what you need to become, a high availability and disaster recovery solutions expert. Oh, and by the way, I said I will be creating this as a series, so you will be seeing more of this, kind of like career-driven a series on how you can either upgrade your role maybe move within the organization or change jobs. Maybe there's not enough challenge within your organization, or maybe you've been working in the same organization for a couple of years and you've mastered everything. Like you can fix problems even with your eyes closed, and there's no more challenge, and you want that challenge because you want to grow. Okay, so let's get back to this. And again, simply testing my new setup here. Let's see. First one, and of course, as usual, make sure you have your pen and paper ready. Focus on outcomes instead of just the tech. Okay, one is focus on outcomes instead of just the tech. Notice that I mentioned not just the tech. As an operator, DBA, systems administrator, or engineer, we're so focused on the tech. Like for instance, I'll give you an example for high availability and or disaster recovery solutions. Available clustered instance, availability groups. Log shipping, database mirroring, although that's been deprecated. When it comes to disaster recovery, backups, differential with full with log, file group. We're so focused on the tech. Okay, as an architect, you have to step outside of that role for an instance, because, and this is the way I look at technology. Technology is there to solve a business problem. Okay, technology exists to solve a business problem. So it's never simply a conversation of SQL Server 2022, SQL Server 2025, Enterprise Edition, Standard Edition. It's beyond that. The reason why you're making those decisions is because it's meant to solve a business problem. So if you want to start thinking like an architect and become a solutions architect, building solutions or high availability and disaster recovery solutions, you have to start thinking in terms of outcomes. Okay? Outcomes. What are those outcomes? Okay? There are different types of outcomes, and I know by default, when we're talking about high availability and disaster recovery, people would gravitate towards asking questions like recovery point objective, recovery time objectives, SLAs, but you have to go beyond that. At this point, okay, whether you're a DBA, sysadmin, anybody taking care of a data platform solution, the question of a recovery point objective, recovery time objective, and SLA should be a given. And it's interesting because I have been doing this for more than 20 plus years now. And every time I would ask, what is your RPO, RTO, and SLA? Still, very few operators, and I mean database administrators, systems engineers, or anybody who's taking care of the day-to-day operations, very few would have an answer. And of course, RPO, RTO, we're looking at time intervals, like recovery point objective of 1 hour, recovery time objective of 1 hour. But very few, when I ask that question, very few will have a distinct answer or an exact answer. It's fine when somebody says it's roughly 3 or 4 hours, at least they know. But when somebody says, we really don't know what the RPO and RTO is, not even the distinction between RPO and RTO for HA versus RPO and RTO for DR. When you start to architect or design a solution for high availability and disaster recovery, that should be a given. Okay, so the focus should be on outcomes. Outcomes would mean, again, starting off with a question: what is our recovery point objective, recovery time objective, and what is our SLA? Okay, that is the goal. It's not enough where you were told, let's build an availability group. And the joke that I always tell people when I was at SQL Bits, the joke that I told people was that, well, you got to learn how to play golf, because your CIO met somebody at a golf tournament and he was recommended to implement availability groups. That's how most technical decisions are happening nowadays. But again, that's the reality. Okay. So if somebody, or if your boss or CEO says deploy this, you have to focus on the outcome. What are we trying to achieve here? What's the goal? What's the outcome? Okay. And of course, they don't know that always on available group is this, or failover clustered instance is this. What I mean by that is, oh, it's a, you can have 3 nodes, 4 nodes, 5 nodes, as many nodes as you possibly can, as much as your bank account can afford because of the licensing. Okay. They don't know the details. They just know, oh, it sounds fancy. You do. But beyond that, you have to start asking the question, what are we trying to accomplish here? What's the goal? So focus on the outcome. The outcome should be clear both from the business and from the technical point of view. Okay. Um, the solution that you are thinking about, that you're creating, should be in alignment, or should address and should meet those goals, those objectives. Again, focus on outcomes or goals instead of simply just the tech. And it's tempting, right? I will have to admit, this was me way back in the day. My boss would say, let's build an AG, or way back when we didn't have AG, it was either failover clustering or log shipping. This was SQL Server 2000, SQL Server 7 back in those days. Let's build a failover cluster. Sure. How many nodes? How much drive space do we need? What's the connectivity between our shared storage? And those are the kind of things that I think about. Instead of asking, what is my goal? What are we trying to accomplish here? Okay. As a follow-up to this, or not a follow-up, but kind of like a corollary to this, number one is focusing on outcomes. Number two is asking business questions that lead to designing the solution instead of purely asking technical questions. Okay. And like I said, at this point, it should be a given. The question about recovery point objective, recovery time objective, and service level agreements should be a given, whether or not you're a solutions architect. That should be a given. In fact, whenever I show a screenshot of, and typically I don't use a wizard when I'm building a database maintenance plan, but I simply show that to highlight that there is a reason for the schedule of the full database backup, for the schedule of the log backup, the frequency of that. It's not just, hey, it's there, just pick and choose. No. The reason why you have that is because you are configuring something as a DR strategy to meet a specific goal or meet a specific outcome. But again, as a corollary to this, is asking, or rather focusing on asking business questions. And this is challenging for us technology professionals because we have been conditioned to focus on the tech. So the questions that we ask focus on the tech. Okay. Again, I'll give an example. As an operator, I was told we need to deploy an availability group. We need to deploy failover clustered instance. Typical question that an operator would ask, and I know because I used to ask these questions: how many nodes? How many replicas? Synchronous or asynchronous commit? Where will the nodes be? How much disk space is allocated? These are technical questions, and they're great questions. However, that's for an operator. That's for the DBA. That's for the sysadmin. You have to rise above the DBA, the sysadmin. You have to rise above the operator way of thinking and start asking business questions. Like I said, this is very difficult for technology professionals like us because, again, we have been conditioned to focus on asking technical questions. So again, recovery point, recovery time objective, service level agreements, those should be a given. But what other questions, what are the business questions can you ask? Stuff like, what is the impact to the business when we lose this database? Say, for instance, you are being given the mandate to build a high availability solution for your e-commerce platform. Keep in mind, I didn't say database, platform. That would lead to my third point. E-commerce platform. Beyond asking the question, how many nodes, how many replicas, what's the RPO and RTO and SLA, what's the throughput like, What else? What's the size of the database? What's the IOPS? Beyond that, okay, beyond that, you ask questions. What's the impact of the business? Okay, if we lose this e-commerce site for like an hour, what's the impact of the business? Because anybody could say, oh, RPO and RTO should be as close to zero as possible. Typically, decision makers would say, I need zero downtime and zero data loss. Sure. Okay. Or as close to zero as possible. But when you ask them, what's the business impact? They could not quantify it. They're simply guessing because that's what's nice to hear. I want 99.999% uptime. Sure, but what's the business impact? If this is an e-commerce platform, I'm pretty sure you have numbers. Your salespeople will have, the finance people would have numbers. Those numbers translate to revenue generated within X, and that X could be an hour, could be a day, and then you plot that according to the number of hours, the number of days, so you have an idea. So if you lose, and I'll just throw in numbers, and I like using Amazon as an example because a lot of people know Amazon, they shop on Amazon. Let's say Amazon makes $1,000 per second. I'm being conservative. They probably make more, 100x or 1,000x. $1,000 per second, meaning $60,000 per minute. Meaning, hopefully I do my math, $3.6 million an hour. 60, yeah. Imagine that. The impact to the business when a website that generates $3.6 million an hour is down for an hour, the business is losing 3.6. That is a question worth asking to the right people. The salespeople, the finance people, because they're the ones who know these types of numbers, and these are the ones that directly affect the business. Beyond that, because revenue sometimes it's totally detached from the technical people, right? I know I'm a DBA, I'm taking care of this database, but I don't know the business impact. I know it's generating revenue. How much? I have no idea, because we don't bother asking the sales and the finance people the business impact of this. And of course, we're quantifying that based on the numbers that they collected versus the ones that we're seeing in the database. Okay, like your BI reporting, you can correlate that. But of course, this is the type of question that you can ask finance and the salespeople. What else? Publicity. Oh, we are running this e-commerce platform. Again, using Amazon and Shopify even. You lose a platform for like a minute or an hour. Publicity. Okay? When something like that happens, it hits the news. Literally hits the news. And if you're a Fortune 100 company, that turns into a negative market confidence. And I know I'm speaking gibberish as far as technical people are concerned, but again, these are the types of questions that you need to ask the people who are making those decisions, because it's no longer just, oh, we'll build an AG. No, because when that platform is down, it will affect revenue. It will affect publicity. Again, I'm pretty sure you've heard or you've read several news articles where a company was on the front page because they lost the platform. Like I remember a couple of months ago, I forgot if it was a NASDAQ or the S&P 500 was down for a couple of seconds, a couple of minutes, and it was in the news, right? Market confidence, because of that, customers can decide, hey, we want to move to a different platform because this one's down. Okay, I couldn't count the number of times when a website's down. I am not even going to continue after 30 seconds. I move on. Okay, another question, and I said you focus on asking business questions instead of merely technical questions. Are there regulatory requirements, legal requirements, or some contractual obligations? I remember when I was working as a data center engineer, we have this policy, and again, this was what, almost 20 plus years ago. We had this policy of data sovereignty boundaries. We built data centers on the basis of government regulations when it comes to keeping the data within geographical regions. okay, within geographical regions. That's one of the reasons why even with Azure, you have the Azure government, AWS had the same thing. These are data governance or data sovereignty rules that you have to be aware of, because now you're designing something like that. Although again, in a public cloud infrastructure, what's your guarantee that the data is not moving between data centers? Okay? You can't see it, of course. On premises, you have control over that. But the thing is, these are the questions that you need to ask. Why? Because now when you're building an HA solution where you have local high availability, you're thinking, okay, this is kind of like the architecture that I want, but with disaster recovery, wait a second. Oh, okay. Now I have to start picking a disaster recovery site within the boundaries of the data sovereignty requirements that I need to comply with when it comes to the data not leaving a specific territory. Okay. And again, it goes beyond just, I'll take a backup, ship it to my DR site. It goes beyond that. Because now you'll start to ask questions. Even, and this is again a common thing, where you're building an HA solution and a DR solution, and the data includes PII data or anything that would classify as PII or HIPAA kind of data. And then developers would ask for a copy of the data so that they can refresh the development environment. You have to have a design in such a way that when developers do ask for that data, they're not just taking the backup and restoring it in development environment. As a solutions architect, you have to design for these kinds of things. It's beyond just, hey, we'll take the backup, restore it, that's it. Okay. Another question I like to ask is, what's the growth strategy? Because the business is supposed to grow. Okay, the business is supposed to grow. And I remember, was that the I forgot what it was. The law, Moore's law, that is. Moore's law dictates the computing capacity based on the technologies. The way I look at it is, I call it the database law, where the growth of the company is directly related to how your data increases or grows. Okay, the more you accumulate data, or the more you accumulate data, the more the company grows. Okay, as a side effect of that, because transactions is business to business transactions in most cases. So as more transactions are introduced in the database, the business, of course, has to grow. So you're looking at it from scalability, performance, and availability point of view. So you have to factor that in as part of your design. Okay, as part of your design. And notice that a lot of these things are outside of the realm of our responsibilities as operators. That's why in the beginning, the way I kind of frame this is to start thinking outside of what you're comfortable with. Of course, this does not negate the fact that you still have to be technically competent. Okay, you still have to be technically competent. The third one here is learn how systems are interconnected, and then learn systems thinking. Okay, learn how systems are interconnected, and then learn systems thinking. Okay, this is kind of like a remember I mentioned earlier e-commerce platform. I did not say e-commerce database, because the more complex something is, the more it is connected to something else other than itself. Again, refer back to a previous video that I did, the Beyond the DBA World, where when you're building an always-on availability group or a failover clustered instance, SQL Server is dependent on things outside of SQL Server in order to achieve high availability. Windows Server failover clustering, Active Directory, DNS, networking, storage, all of these things. Oh, and by the way, you're also dependent on your network service provider. If that's a DR solution, that's, you're dependent on that. But in addition to that, one of the reasons I mentioned earlier when I was using the Amazon example, an e-commerce platform, because you don't just design a high availability and disaster recovery solution in isolation. You're looking at it as, sure, again, I'll use availability groups as an example. SQL Server is dependent on external components, but your database is also dependent on other external components to make it a part of the entire platform. I did say e-commerce platform, right? Which means you're now looking at the application layer. You're looking at the middle tier, in addition to looking at the database layer. You might not be designing the middle tier, the application layer, nor are you going to be taking care of the network, but you have to look at it in that whole stack. And the example that I use a lot is when you were buying stuff off of Amazon, okay? When you're buying stuff off of Amazon, and my phone, and you're using the app, and all of a sudden the app froze while you're clicking checkout. You don't say, oh, there's a database problem. You don't say, oh, it's a networking problem. Even though we're technical professionals, you don't assume, or you don't narrow down the problem. Oh, it's a database problem. You just say, oh, it's down. The fact that you're saying it is down means it doesn't matter if your databases are up and running. It doesn't matter if the network is stable, reliable, highly available. It doesn't matter if the storage is functioning well. It's still down. From the point of view of the customer, it is offline. And they move on, going back to asking the business questions. When customers decide, I want to move away from this website, forget about the checkout page because it's down. That's customers moving away from your platform and going to something else. The internet is big. I can get it from something or somewhere else, right? So you have to start looking at how systems are interconnected. So SQL Server, storage, VMs, networking, okay? But beyond that, you're looking at other things that make the entire ecosystem, that make the entire platform possible. This is also one of the reasons why whenever somebody would come to me, bring me in as a consultant, and they would say, we want automatic failover. Local failover? Sure. But the first question you need to ask is, okay, does your application support automatic failover? Meaning, have they built in retry logic in the connection string or in the application that would allow for automatic failover? Because it doesn't matter if your database is automatically failed over within a couple of seconds. If the application cannot connect because it is not built with reconnection logic within it, then it's technically offline. So you have to factor that in. And as a solutions architect, designing high availability solutions, these are also some of the questions that you need to ask. Now this is kind of like technical questions in addition to asking business questions. You have to start thinking about, hey, wait a second. The application does not support automatic failover. We're wasting our time here, okay? And this is even challenging when you're looking at third-party applications. Sometimes it's frustrating. It works. You built it. You tested it. It works. It's not a question of whether something works or not. It's a question of whether or not the vendor would actually support the product using this solution. It's challenging because sometimes your hands are tied, and it's not a technical conversation anymore. It's a legal conversation because the vendor does not want to support it. So you design based on that. And the only way that you would understand this is when you know how the systems are interconnected. So your apps are connected to a middle tier. Again, I'm just using an example here. Your apps are connected to a middle tier. Middle tier is the one connecting to the database. Okay, so stuff like when you're looking at microservices, apps, probably front end, connects to an authentication service, connects to an API. Those are the middle tier. API connects to something else that queries some data and then checks if that exists within the database. Those are interconnected systems. App, middle tier, then your database. You don't provide a high availability solution for your data platform without providing high availability solutions for your middle tier, for your app, for your web front end. Okay? Sometimes I don't want to say it's frustrating, but sometimes the customer has gone through the exercise of they bought the license, they bought the hardware, they bought all of these things for the database. for the database, not realizing, oh, the application. I never thought of the application. Okay. Now you might be thinking, wait a second, this is outside of the scope of the data platform, like the middle tier, for instance, or the application layer. That's outside of the scope of the data platform. Why am I supposed to think about that? Well, for one, remember what I said about the Amazon application, and you're using the app on your phone. And you cannot hit checkout. You don't just say, oh, it's a database problem or it's a networking problem. No, it's an app problem. You don't say that. And it also doesn't matter if your databases are highly available, takes less than a few seconds to fail over. If the app could not connect to it because the app is not highly available, then there's no point. The customer will still say it's offline. So you have to ask those types of questions and understand. Wait, how do you understand? Well, you ask questions like, how does the application do this? How does it connect? How does the application connect to the middle tier? How does the middle tier connect to the database? Because all of those things you have to factor in. I'm not saying you design high availability solutions for the middle tier or for the app. All I'm saying is you need to understand how all of these components connect and are interconnected, because there's no point in building a high availability solution if the middle tier in your front or your app is not highly available. It's just a waste of time, waste of money, waste of resources, and push back on it. Okay, you got to push back on it. So these are kind of like the things that you have to start doing in order for you to become a high availability and disaster recovery solutions architect. Because now you're thinking of designing solutions not just for the data platform high availability and disaster recovery, but also factoring in components outside of the data platform solution that would require the entire platform to be highly available. Okay, it's also one of the reasons why I remember a couple of years back when customers would design a stretched cluster, which I no longer recommend nowadays. Customers will design a stretched cluster and want automatic failover between data centers. First question I ask is, so does your application support automatic failover? Because if it doesn't, you just wasted a whole bunch of time building a very complex architecture that is not going to work. Okay? Because again, it doesn't matter if you're the best DBA in the world, best systems engineer in the world, that you built an architecture that could automatically fail over your databases between data centers. If your apps are not designed to fail over across data centers and also automatically reconnect, then you just wasted a whole bunch of time, money, resources on building something that is useless. Which is why you go back to the first question, focus on outcomes. What outcomes do you want to achieve? What's the goal? What are we trying to accomplish here? Second is you ask business questions. And again, this is the most challenging piece. The technical part is easy. The most challenging piece is asking business questions. Why? Because we're not business people. We're not exposed to the day-to-day business operations where your database has a direct impact on the revenue, on the public image, on regulations and compliance requirements. You don't get to see that. Decision makers do. So this is asking business questions for me was one of the most difficult things to do. And finally, learning how different systems are interconnected, and then learn systems thinking. I didn't really define what systems thinking is. Let me get back to this. Said learn systems thinking. And when you think about it, systems thinking is kind of like it is a way of thinking where you make sense of the complexity by looking at it in terms of wholes. Okay. Again, from the point of view of just the database platform like SQL Server, you want to deploy availability groups. You're not just looking at SQL Server, but systems thinking is looking at it from top to bottom. Active Directory, DNS, networking, storage, failover clustering, and then SQL Server. And in addition to that, this is just the data platform. you extend that into, middle tier, this is how it is. It connects to the data platform. Oh, by the way, applications connect to the middle tier then connects to the database. This is how it is. You're looking at it from a higher level point of view, and then making sense of how everything works. And again, I did say that this would force you to step outside of your comfort zone, because this is something that we don't normally do on a day-to-day basis. We're so focused on the operations aspect of what we do every day, and we barely get a chance to look at things outside of it. Okay, especially when you're highly specialized in one area. Like, I'm only focused on the data platform. We don't get the opportunity to step outside of a realm of expertise and start asking business questions, and not realizing that this is what it takes to become a solutions architect. And I did say earlier, being technically competent is a must, meaning you gotta know the technical details. You have to have the technical skills. That's a given. That's the baseline. And then you start by upgrading the way you think, the way you ask questions, the way you see things, the way you understand things, which means going outside and beyond the things that you manage, in this case, the data platform solutions. Okay? That is about it. And like I said, I am going to start including topics like this, where it has a direct impact into your career, career upgrades, development. And I'm going to start coming up with topics like how to become a solutions architect. Okay. Tune in again, and that's about it for this episode of the Practical SQL Server HA show. Tune in again next week for another episode. And if you need help with anything regarding your high availability and disaster recovery solutions, whether it's implementing, or maybe you're in the earlier stage where you're thinking about, hey, we haven't really thought of that. What's the business impact? What are the compliance requirements? Are there any data governance rules that we need to be aware of? You're in the design phase and you need some guidance, or you're already in the implementation phase. You've already deployed it in production, but you don't have the team to manage it. And this is also another thing that you really have to think about when you're designing. As a solutions architect, you have to ask the question, do we have people that are both capable and available to make sure that this thing stays online as much as we possibly can? Those are the things that you have to also ask. If you help, use that link on the screen, schedule a strategy session. This link will redirect you to my calendar page, where you can pick and choose a time that works for you, and we'll hop on a call. And in that call, we are going to explore two things. One, where are you at? Are you in the exploration phase, where you're building, or you're thinking of building a high availability solution, or you're in the implementation stage where you need guidance on the implementation, or you're now post-production, or you've cut over to production and you now need help with making sure that you have the team ready to keep the lights on. Again, use that link on the screen, schedule a strategy session. Happy to help in any way I can. At the end of the call, of course, you're going to have strategy, specific, detailed strategy that works for you. There's no such thing as a perfect strategy. Okay. There's only one that is good for you. That's perfect for you at that stage. Okay. It all has to, it really depends on where you are at and what you currently have. So again, use that link on the screen, schedule a strategy session, and looking forward to talking to you. Or sometimes you can bring your team in the call so that we can explore more what are other possibilities on how you can move forward. All right. That is about it. If you're in the United States, enjoy your 4th of July long weekend. Yes, we had Canada Day a couple of days ago. If you're, again, if you're in the United States, enjoy for your 4th of July weekend, long weekend that is. Enjoy the rest of your summer, and I'll see you again in the next episode of the Practical SQL Server HA show. Goodbye.